Okay.
With that, I'll call to order the meeting, the second meeting. And first or second item on the agenda is a public session. Any comments?
I've got one. I'm just wondering how in the world that anybody can discuss a contract with anybody at the airport when nobody on the county board and nobody in the airport board knows which freaking statute the airport's operating under. And you guys just flat out refuse to let anybody know what statute you're operating under, which leads me to believe you guys don't know. So please correct me if I'm wrong. If you know, just say so. No comment means you don't know. Good way to do business. Really, really good way to do business.
Thank you for your comments. Anything else?
I had a question.
Okay.
You, Mr. Chairman. The state so far has decided to withhold some funds of X dollars on minimal amounts perhaps from the county highway department. Do you plan to financially reimburse the county for any of the funds that have been withheld?
That's what this will be discussed at this meeting.
So, okay, you're going to answer whether or not you plan for the county to carry the financial burden from now until your issue is resolved, or if you personally.
Where did you get the information that the county is a financial burden?
Well, the county is the one bearing the expense.
Where did you get that? Where did you get the information?
From the state of Illinois.
Where is the state of Illinois?
That they have withheld funding.
Where did that come from?
It's not a cross-examination.
Yeah.
Tell them you want to.
You don't have to answer that. Just say no comment.
Are there any other comments?
Basically, you expect the county to continue to bear the expense.
Can't bear something that doesn't exist.
So,
Any other? Go ahead.
go ahead.
Any other comments?
Yes, I've got a couple.
Okay.
Mr. Patrick, I understand that you resigned from the Airport Advisory Board. Could you tell me what day you did that?
Okay.
Would that have been the day that you were sworn in as the county board chairman? Or on the county board?
I do not know.
Okay. Well, there are some documents that you sent to Bureau of Aeronautics in Springfield representing yourself as a member of the Edgar County Airport Advisory Board, and that was well after you had resigned that position. And in those documents, there were some falsified documents. A letter that was sent in July that nobody has ever seen, nobody's ever signed. And there's also in this FOIA request, I discovered the 14 pages you sent to the Bureau of Aeronautics. There's a number of omissions that slant the argument to your favor. But my question is, do you have any comment on that at this time?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
So you don't recall sending documents to the Bureau of Aeronautics after you resigned from the Airport Advisory Board?
No, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Good news. That was the FOIA request that you told Augie that you couldn't fill for me and that I should get the FOIA information from the Bureau of Aeronautics, which I did. So next meeting, I'll bring those copies.
Okay.
A couple of other things. Mr. Isip, I've been trying to get in touch with you for more than 5 weeks. I've been to your office and you're not available. I've sent emails and you wouldn't respond to it. I sent a second email and then the response to that was, well, you don't want to meet with me. Why?
This isn't a debate time. You'll comment.
This is my comment time, so you don't have to answer that. But I want you to know that I'd like to visit with you as a taxpayer here in Edgar County. And I think 5 or 6 weeks is kind of a lengthy time. You should be able to schedule in somewhere. I've also noticed meetings here, not in this environment, but a number of people are asking about night meetings. And the comment from me and the input that I hope this board will take back is that people would like to see these county board meetings occurring after they get off their normal day shift job so they can sit in and maybe participate. It's a hardship for people to take time off work and come listen to this stuff, and they don't do it. The last thing I want to say here, I don't know how much time I've got, is the breastfeeding issue. Now, there was a meeting on November 13th at the airport advisory board in which Mr. Patrick was the chairperson. All of the comments from that point in time have been that, well, we never said that nasty word breastfeeding, and Jimmy never agreed to it, and Chris never brought it up, and that never happened. I propose a solution. In Mattoon, Illinois, there's a licensed polygraph examiner. He's a retired police officer. Why don't Chris Patrick and Jimmy Wells and myself go over there and I'll take a polygraph test and see who's really lying about what took place in that meeting. There were other board members present that at the end of that meeting, they called their friends and said, hey, I can't believe what they just voted on and what they just discussed. So what I'm saying here is that Mr. Patrick and anybody else that denies that was said in that meeting are liars. So, anybody want to take me up on that offer to take a polygraph test? I don't expect you to do it. I'll pay the $400 fine, but or service fee to do that. But I want to make it clear that this is a great way to clear your name. And that's all I've got.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Is there ever going to be any resolution to the fact that sitting as airport chairman, you sold cement or ready mix to the airport and received over $7,000 in that capacity? Because all the IDOT issue aside, I find that very hard to believe that we don't see that as a conflict of interest and a clear violation of the law. There's no approvals anywhere for that action, but you put money in your pocket while you were in charge of that airport.
I respectfully disagree with you.
Okay.
Anybody else? With that, the next item on the agenda, discussion of conflict of interest with the county board members. Mark had a meeting last week. Was it?
Last Wednesday.
Last Wednesday. That was in the paper. I just thought it would be prudent to have him come and kind of fill the board members in on how to, what was covered and what went on at the meeting. So with that, Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
I can first state this recap is my understanding. So we always get in the danger of saying somebody said something, and if it's not verbatim, it's misquoted, or it may be inaccurate. This is my understanding of a conversation, negotiation that is taking place with Illinois Department of Transportation, their Office of Chief Counsel, as well as the engineering side. And when I do relate things, I'm not quoting anybody from that conversation. So when you
When you say engineering side, are you talking about out here or Springfield?
I believe it's a gentleman locally at, and then the district engineer, Mr. Crow, Mr. Lackey, and individuals from the Office of Chief Counsel I got. But I'm not putting words in their mouth, so I don't want that. I want that being understood. What people do with it or whether they understand it or not, it's up to them. But it's not productive when you're in negotiations, number one, to be essentially publicizing it, because one side will get probably bent out of shape if they're misquoted, or I tell them this is their position. So I want to make that clear. I don't want to take the risk of my understanding as things are. It's a fluid situation. Nothing's been determined, and there are some proposals that would address IDOT's concerns that need to be fine-tuned, for lack of a better term. They are resolutions to be presented to the board, but I think think it would serve a little purpose to give my understanding of why we're here at this point. The IDOT want to make sure the protecting the interest of the taxpayers. State and federal funds are involved, and they are audited by, as I understand it, by Federal Highway Administration, and they don't want to be responsible for any payback to federal sources for funds that are determined to be involved in conflict of interest situations that they are responsible for locally. So they have a concern of potential liability for the funds that are released in Edgar County when they're audited. So the potential for conflict of interest was basically identified as the concern. So we're talking prospective, future, potential conflict of interest. Mr. Patrick Zimmerly is what is the identified potential conflict as a sitting county board member. And this was brought up in December after Mr. Patrick took office. The Federal Highway Administration, the source of all the funds, the federal highway funds that are of great concern, had proposed a resolution by a letter dated December 20th. And IDOT also produced a letter dated January 4th with a proposal to resolve the situation. Mr. Patrick submitted a recusal letter in compliance with the proposed resolutions, both state and federal. And it used kind of IDOT suggested language. And that was January 8th, 2013, I believe, if my dates are correct. On January 9th, 2013, a bookkeeper service and a surveyor service was approved by the board. The chairman has to execute whatever someone has to sign off on whatever the board decides. So the execution of the board's vote authorization for the preliminary engineering and bookkeeping services, IDOT determined was a violation of the recusal letter, and so they are holding up, as I understand it, two potential projects. The paperwork's being held up on. I deliberately tried to inquire based upon information locally that millions and millions of dollars are being lost or not paid. I wanted to know, A, is this true, and B, who's responsible, whose decision, and then C, what are the facts and what are we talking about, so we can try and get down to instead of general forest view things, get down to facts and splitting hairs or whatever lawyers do. And again, and I want to make sure this is understood, my understanding of the conversation was that they're concerned about the execution being a violation of the recusal letter, and as well as attendance at basically open meetings. I think it's the Road and Bridge Committee was also, again, mentioned as a concern for IDOT in the violation of this recusal letter. The interpretation of the recusal letter is really what is being discussed, because their interest is a very broad, one-size-fits-all, this will solve it for us. When it comes down from my perspective, as I give advice to elected officials, it's too broad. And could I come up with a scenario where each one of you could potentially be in conflict with something? Probably. And I'm trying to balance the duly elected officials' position to represent people, put them in office, with the concern for taxpayer money, as well as to keep IDOT satisfied, because they're the spigot. If regardless of what I say, if they decide it doesn't really matter, we're turning the spigot off, then no money's coming to the county. And that has not been done, but the reality of it is the Edgar County State's Attorney has no power, A, to say, you step off the board, B, IDOT, keep paying money. So we're in a position of trying to understand the dispute and say, well, what is necessary to resolve this, if it can be resolved? And it can be resolved. There are two proposals for resolutions, one of which is that for local road construction and maintenance issues, that the board authorize the vice chairman, or anybody it chooses, I think it would make sense to be the board chair, the vice chairman, to execute or sign these agreements that the board passes. Because we also then talk, and again, we get off into a lot of offshoots of why this is a little more complicated than people understand. The powers of the chairman are very limited, and he doesn't vote unless there's a tie. He doesn't sit on a committee. He doesn't go over bids and specs, or shouldn't. And so telling an elected official they can't do something is, I mean, there has to be some identifiable or definable personal interest to be benefited by influencing something. Just by the fact something occurs with no influence, no vote, no bid, no specification, may not be the conflict of interest. And it's up to, it's kind of like doing tax returns. If you ask 10 accountants to give a tax return, you're going to get 9 different returns. If you ask 10 attorneys on a conflict of interest issue, you're going to get 5 different answers. So ultimately, it'd be easiest just to say, whatever you want, fine. You tell us, if they jump, we'll say how high. But in reality, that can't happen. But it's with full recognition, it's state and federal money. They set their comfort level with how close to the flame we get. I may have a different comfort level. Any individual official may have a comfort level they're willing to go. And we face conflicts every day, every decision, every issue. It's the elected official's job to avoid them. So I don't see in the future anybody that walks into a conflict, they should all well be advised that you got to be alert, and you have to be, you have to understand where your personal interests lie and what influences you are attempting or actually doing. But in any event, the two proposals that need to be fine-tuned, I would like to be able to bring to the board for a vote at a special meeting the second week of April. That should give time enough for me to propose the language in IDOT's Office of Chief Counsel to have input or be aware of. In other words, I see this as a problem to be resolved. I think it can be if each side wants to. And we'll determine as we progress. This is the issue on the table now. There's an ability to get it resolved. Whether it gets resolved, we're going to work through and see whether or not it does. Ultimately, if we have limited leverage and they say it's this, this, and this, or else, then that'll be put. in Mr. Patrick's lap, and a decision will have to be made. But that's not the impression that I have from our discussion. It's, we have a concern, you're interpreting the recusal letter different than we are interpreting it, and that they would like to see more federal state money, as I understand it, that's used. I would tend to think, and I think, and I don't want to speak for, I tend to think personal interest should be involved. So, for example, if it's involving asphalt, Zimri doesn't sell it, so there's no personal interest. That tends to be forgotten by a forest view look of just saying, well, he just shouldn't be involved in anything in this area. That's kind of stuff that needs to be clarified. They have a very, very broad interpretation, and for the, for the right reasons. I think we have a more narrow interpretation. I think for the right reasons, whether it's for him to serve, the people who put him on the board to do things. But there's a proposal to, again, have the vice chairman sign an execution. He's not signing any document. His name will not appear on local road construction maintenance projects. There's a second proposal that clarifies the chain of command. Seems to be a bad word or a bad choice of words. Who the county engineer should be reporting to. It would seem or appear that I don't think it's clear as it stands anyway, from what, again, I observe. I don't know that there's a job description that says it, or contract provision. I don't know if Aaron can shed any light on that. I think there's a typical courtesy of talking and sharing information with whatever board member is interested. But as far as there being any definitive reporting procedure, I would think it's a natural conclusion that motor fuel tax chairman in that committee and the road and bridge chairman in that committee would have the most day-to-day contact and responsibilities when it comes to county highway. But again, that's not me for decide. It's my thought. It's a board decision. But that would be the other, I think, prophylactic or protective measure that IDOT would like to have in place to, again, not that something's been done wrong, to avoid question and ambiguity. They would like that clarified. And so that'd be brought to the board. At the same time, the other resolution to just have the vice chairman or whoever the board decides sign the next few documents.
Is that a resolution that you're going to write, or are you expecting us to do that?
No, I would do that. That's the language that intent. I don't want it to appear that we're dictating to ITOT in any way. It's their money. They identified problems that they are uncomfortable with. It's our job to attempt to resolve those if possible.
How would that solve the conflict of interest if the vice chairman signs for a project and Chris still sells concrete to the county? He's on the board.
Well, it would depend on what the issue becomes. When is he selling concrete? How did it get to that position? Who went to him?
But the project is set up by Aaron to have concrete delivered or sold to the county. If, let's say, our vice chairman signs off on it and Chris still sells concrete to the county, and that's still a conflict of interest?
That would depend. Has he exercised any influence? Has he requested, demanded, ordered? Is it the cheapest? I'm saying, is it the cheapest?
I realize it'd be the cheapest, I agree.
We got into another discussion about different uses and whose job it would be to get low bids,
I understand that.
find out what the best expenditure for the taxpayer is, and how the business, if he's bidding, entering into a contract, can't do it. Plain and simple. If he is a supplier, there's a different, there are different mechanics involved in how Zimmerly is being involved. If a yard, and I don't know the terms, I'm not familiar with construction, but a yard of concrete, or whatever that is necessary. Is it better or worse for the government entity to go to Vermillion, Kohl's, wherever the competition
That
is?
should not be the issue.
It is the issue, though, because he's not influencing. It's a two-sided issue.
But you're
What
talking about
influence-
price. I mean, I agree and get it cheaper here.
What
But-
influence, impact, involvement does the person have? Not just, is there a financial benefit? It's a two-sided.
We have two board members that have businesses in Edgar County, and I don't think they do any business with the county that would be a conflict of interest, because they recluse themselves from that. They did when they got on the board. This hasn't happened.
Okay. Can't disagree with that.
Just make the point.
Mark, would it be helpful, we have two committees now that deal, we have the motor fuel and we have the road and bridge. Would it be better if we expanded one committee and combined them with that?
I agree, I think so too.
In other words, if we just had one committee,
No, I don't
would
think
that make it easier for your?
I don't think that deals with the conflict issue, because whether it's one meeting or 5 meetings, or one group or 5 different groups,
Okay.
if you know, and again, it's going to be part, did the board vote no to anything? I mean, the board has a responsibility as well. But the board is passing along and voting, they can vote no to something. So the idea that influence can be used, or position can be used, or to pay himself becomes an issue. And again, the comfort level for each person may be different. If somebody steps into it and decides that they can push the flame and actually do something, and it leads to a more definitive problem, that's the risk every board member takes.
There's also another way this could be resolved completely. I'm not going to say how it could be resolved, but there is one word it could be resolved.
I can think of a handful of ways it could be
I
resolved.
can think of one main one.
Got a question for me?
No, I'm just making a comment.
So it'll be up to the board to consider those two resolutions. And if there's discussion or an unwillingness or another solution, feel free to bring it up at any time.
I have one more question, and maybe Aaron can answer this. Are there any counties where the actual engineer himself is authorized by the board to sign rather than an actual member of the board? Could we find that?
Counties and city municipalities delegated, the city manager delegates signing authority down, a lot of times the director.
I'm just wondering whether that could be a way to do it also.
I think the board can authorize the resolutions I bring forward. It's clearly stated who the board is authorizing to give signatory authority. 90% of the forms that we have, the motor fuel tax forms we have right on the boilerplate, chairman of the board, we got to strike that, but something in there. I think to answer your question, yes.
Ultimately, it's who's demanding the authority. If IDOT came back and said, well, we don't care who you want, we want this guy to do it, and if he can't do it, now we're in that position where a decision has to be made one way or the other.
I'm just asking a question.
Yeah, so I mean, well, I think the board can decide if it's more, for other reasons, combining the committees are more efficient or a better use of funds. I don't think it addresses the conflict of interest issue, or the potential for conflict of interest issue. It really is, they they identified some things that concern them, and these are what resulted from that. Are they workable? Seems like they are, but if it doesn't get to that point, and the reason I'm using mid-April, I understand the two things at risk are jobs to be let in June of this year. And with the June letting date, really, you can't wait till June to deal with it. It's mid-April deadlines are the concern. And if the issue is essentially resolved, then there won't be a delay to those projects. If it lingers on, there's always a potential for more projects to get stacked, and if they don't, as I understand how it works, if it's not ready and it doesn't go, then money goes to the projects that are ready, you know?
In our favorable position in getting good bids, as people's dance cards get filled out, contractors plan things, and then we're not on the list.
Let me ask you a question, maybe this will clarify. If a contractor from Chicago, let's just call it Smith Company, comes down here and is a successful bidder on a bridge in Edgar County, to say in Kansas Township or Vernon Township, and they get the bid, and then they want to go to Zimmerly and buy the concrete, is a conflict because Zimmerly is supplying the concrete and making money off of that, or is the conflict because they sold the concrete to the contractor and the contractor went and made was able to make the money, or was able to?
And that's where you'll get gray. Some will say, shouldn't get ever, shouldn't get anything. That makes it easy.
Okay.
But what, no influence, is any influence exercised to make that the result? Is he involved? Is there email, phone call, wink? Is there a meeting? Is there an interview? Did he tell Aaron to make sure it's a concrete project and not an asphalt project? Is there, I mean, the factors that go into determining, was influence used for self-benefit, self-gain, usually pecuniary interest? That's the analysis, not just the dollar figures end up over here. And so, if in any way there was involvement, straw man, it just depends on how it came about. What we get into is the easiest way to do it is, no, we can't ever do that. That's the easy answer, but it's not. If something has to be proven, if there was let's say a charge, and there's another thing we discussed. I do things from what I can prove. They're viewing things from, we don't want to get near the flame. And so, one example went 2 or 3 steps that could potentially possibly happen that they want to avoid with the bookkeeper. And I said, well, that's so far into the possible potential that I'm not comfortable saying that's something I can say. I certainly wouldn't file any charges on that. Whether that ends up being something that an elected official would like to get closer and closer to, they get as close to the flames so they can burn. And that becomes then the board, the engineer, the elected official that we're talking about, Mr. Patrick. It's up to him to understand what the conflict is and what the involvement is prohibited and whether or not any influence is being wielded. We get to a point now where there's also one of the issues is not resolvable by resolution, but if one of the current issues remains attendance at a meeting. And I get uncomfortable that they say can't go to a meeting. It's an open meeting. Nobody from any bidder, any competitor, any person that wants to go to a public meeting is entitled to go to a public meeting. How can you tell an elected official not to go? Now, the other side of that is he participating? Is he influencing? Is he in any way currying favor or attempting to develop his personal interest? So it's easy to say, elected officials, don't go to them. Why get that close? But if they want to, as long as they're just sitting there and participating, don't run the meeting, aren't making decisions, aren't trying to influence the vote, it's just like Joe Q. Public going. But that's something that needs to be resolved, and if they're not of the opinion that I am, then the person with the money usually wins.
So in the next 2 weeks, you anticipate hopefully come up with?
I think
a
the two
resolution.
resolutions will be
Right.
ready before, try to get this done before the next board meeting, which I believe is the 16th or 17th, whatever the Wednesday is, 17th. So whatever business that the county highway department needs to conduct at that meeting will be allowed to be conducted. If the resolutions are in place and it satisfies item.
So if that all gets worked out, then we're not gonna miss a deadline on any project, if they get that done in the next 2 weeks.
We've missed some, but we will have the the FY13 federal money for the Lower Terre Hill Road on the April agenda to make sure that we don't lose that money. The FY13 money, federal money that we have programmed, June's the last, is the end of IDOT's FY13. And April 19th is the deadline for an executed local side agreement. And our board meeting's on April 17th.
Well, let me ask you this. You said we've already lost some.
Oh, yeah, well, when you say lost, we have a lot of projects that have been delayed that'll probably continue to be delayed.
Okay.
For example,
When
we
you
have
clarify this for me, if you would please, Mark. This paper that, in the article Mr. Henry wrote, and he got the information from you, correct?
Yes, sir.
There's like 24 or 25 projects, and it says at risk. Is it not your understanding that there were only two, there was nothing at risk, and only two that were being delayed? Am I correct?
It was mentioned that 2 agreements are being withheld, and there was reference to a plan being made. I don't know, otherwise, I could have just ruled the wrong note, but plan to me means some kind of future perspective.
But as far as 25 projects, that's not necessarily the case.
They said they have not, motor fuel tax money is still coming in. They have not said no. They have said we don't like what happened on the January meeting, as I indicated, and we are holding on to agreements.
Okay. Any other questions?
We had 100 projects.
That's not right.
Let him clarify.
Okay.
Are you suggesting that what the paper says is incorrect?
I'm just telling you what Mark discussed with IDOT.
So you think Mark's closer to IDOT than I am?
I'm telling you what Mark says he got from IDOT.
Okay. Yeah, Gary Henry FOIA'd me and got information on projects, just like the Watchdogs did 2 months ago. And if this continues, see, the Department of Transportation will not recognize your signature. So those projects are in fact at risk. Simply put. So, I mean, we have a sign agreement project, we have a sign project that we can't move on.
That sign project was already done by the previous board. Is that not correct?
What do you mean done? There needs to be
Signed, paid for?
No, there needs to be an enterprise agreement signed by the county board chairman.
When was that project initiated?
2009.
Okay.
Let's take that as an example of what federal and state money, federal or state money are going to be used to replace signs, correct? Or to
That's
update correct signs,
That's correct.
right? And IDOT is saying, we don't want the chairman's signature on that project.
I'm not saying that there's a problem and that they will not recognize Edgar County's chairman's signature at this time.
So let's just take this as an example.
Okay?
What does concrete have to do? It's not you, I'm not even asking you, this is
Yeah.
rhetorical.
Okay.
To understand the level of, again, one side, it's just easy to say, anything with federal state money, he shouldn't have any involvement. It's easy to say that. Now it takes care of everything. It takes care of a lot more things.
Yeah,
Now,
I think
this is a rhetorical question now. The real question becomes, where is the financial interest in, the other side of the conflict of interest, where is the financial interest in replacing signs or doing a project with asphalt? There isn't any. So when you come to, is that a conflict of interest? No. There's no interest involved. Now, their interpretation would be, oh, but we think any federal and state dollar. My interpretation and giving advice to the person who is faced with that question would be, that's an awfully broad use of, now again, it's their money. If they say, we don't care what you think, state's attorney, this is what we want, because it's easier for our bookkeeping, then that information would run to Mr. Patrick and say, there is no wiggle room. It's either this or this. Here are your options. But that's not my understanding. Doesn't mean you don't have a different understanding, doesn't mean they haven't said something differently. That's not my understanding from the current information that I have from our conference. And what I hope to resolve is that their understanding is narrowed a bit so that we, meaning the board or Mr. Patrick, know, well, this is what I can't do. Because again, if it came to me, when I saw the withholding the bookkeeper and the surveyor, I thought, well, what's that have to do with, again, personal interest? And they will say, go to the recusal letter and anything involving federal or state money. And they came up with an example of what could happen with the bookkeeper. And we did what if, about 3 different ways. I said, well, okay, if you get far enough down that line, I guess that could happen. But I'm not comfortable disenfranchising voters and saying your elected official should be booted because this could happen if certain stars are aligned right. And that's a conflict. Because once you start there, every official, myself included as elected official, have potentials for conflict. Every case that comes up, every decision you may make. And to have it clarified and to know exactly what rules you're playing by is the goal of this. It doesn't mean, for lack of a better term, my opinion is my opinion. You can argue with it, you can say you're wrong, doesn't really matter. Because I get to say what I say. Ultimately, IDOT, regardless of what I say, IDOT has the money. And if they get to make the rules. And if they are unwilling and are willing to go through what could be some battles on how they determine there's a conflict and why they determine there's a conflict and what issues actually are a conflict versus potential, that will go forward. And how it ends up, there's no easy answer. The easy answer is there's a suggestion that could be put on the table. Easy answer, go away, sign, get out. And now you've set a standard for every time there's a conflict. Do you narrow it down and find out what the conflict is, or do you just simply say, okay? Everybody has a different comfort level with that. And those are the different players that we're trying to solve a problem, resolve a problem. And that's where we are. We have a time frame for Mr. Lawson's projects that I'm aware of, and that's why the April board meeting is what's being, I want it done before then, so you'll know going into that meeting, we have work to do, improve and do whatever, or no, now we're in crisis mode, or we're losing, as I understand it, now we're at risk of those 2 projects having a delayed letting, which to my understanding means money could be shifted to other projects.
So we'll wait a couple of weeks and hopefully you can get it resolved.
We'll be back and forth off the chief counsel. If they agree and they approve the language, the resolutions will be ready by the 2nd week in April, I think it's week of the 8th. On whether or not the original recusal letter or a second recusal letter is fine-tuned or where that ends up, we'll have a response one way or another. And whether or not someone can be prevented from being in an open meeting, we'll have a resolution on that. But those are the, I think the 2 resolutions are the easier accommodations. The other 2 may end up being what, where's the difficulty? I don't know.
Are we, you're talking about 2 different entities, or the federal government and the state government. Is the federal government satisfied? I understood there was some conversation and some...
The Federal Highway Administration has their proposals, what they wanted, and they essentially suggested the solution. They said, we're happy with this, do this.
All right. And they're satisfied?
The state may say, well, we handle that money, so they're not satisfied if we're not satisfied.
Okay.
I don't know how they operate between the state and the federal on these accounts. But the state then proposed kind of the same resolution as the feds, and now they say, well, we understand it'd be different than how you guys are operating now, so we need to get to the bottom of this.
Okay.
And we're trying to, I guess, clarify so we know. And if there is when it gets to the final determinative, no, here's where it is, here's what you can do and do. Then
And we'll
decisions-
cross that bridge when we come.
Other decisions have to be made. It's a fluid, again, there is nothing set now.
And there's no guarantee they'll accept what we put forward.
Well, they suggest, the resolutions are kind of what they suggested. and
Okay.
So we know we're working along the lines that they require.
Okay.
The recusal letter language and the attendance at public meetings or open meetings is a little more unsettled.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mark?
I've got one.
If,
This-
the board
This
could
is- this
choose
is-
not
this
to
is
vote
not-
for any
This is not a
resolution.
public meeting, okay? You were asked for.
You asked.
This is for the board.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board? If not, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Carl.
I'll
by
second.
Mike. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign. Motion carried. Thank you all.
What was your question, Casey? Just for my benefit.
If the board chooses not to vote for either